Welcome back to the Smash Bracket podcast. We haven't done this in so long.
Yeah, it's really been a while.
I'm Ink. You hear my voice in the videos.
I'm Real Lemon. I help a lot behind the scenes. I've been the head researcher for a while. Lately, I've been transitioning to do a lot of other things. Our research team is at a point where they're awesome. They do a whole bunch of the work themselves. So right now, I'm mostly just involved in, I guess, helping with figuring out our rules overall.
Right.
You come to me to help figure out, like, how to present things in an episode sometimes, or make sure that I can do double checks on tricky calcs, things like that.
Yeah.
I was very involved for this episode, though.
Yeah, you've done a lot of the Sonic research, or at least, would you say research or more looking into claims of research that other people have made?
Both. I would say some guy is a researcher who probably did the most original research for this. I went through, I think, every mainline Sonic game myself and a whole bunch of the comics and things. But some guy just went hyper mode, and he was looking at things like Japanese exclusive arcade games that were released in like one store, or just absurd things like that. So he definitely knows like the bulk of
I remember there was
character.
one, it was like a CD cover for some guitar arrangement of Sonic music. Something like that. I'm pretty sure that was Sonic. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
I think actually it was Metal Sonic. Anyway, today we're going to be going through the episode that we just did, kind of doing a deeper dive into the research and presentation that we put into the video, and then answering some questions that we heard a lot. There is so much that we couldn't cover.
Yeah, basically we looked and we made a 40-minute video on this episode, and that's not enough.
Right.
Which really isn't a joke. I think we could probably talk about all the intricacies of these characters and their specific matchup for like at least 10 hours. I think we have as a team for at least a dozen.
Yeah. Oh, like debate back and forth?
Yeah.
Or no, it was more than that. Right before we called the final winner, I went through everything. Because we've had this debate 4-5 times. And so I was like, can we please not do every single thing again? And I went through and kept track of everything that we talked about. We ended up basically doing everything again. But yeah, we have spent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. I wouldn't be surprised if it crossed 100.
It's so hard to talk about the matchup without revisiting every aspect. I know nobody believes us when we say this was a close match, but it really was. And what happens is we'll try to talk about the winners, and we'll try to focus on some new point we're considering, and realize that we can't actually talk about that point without considering the implications it has on, like, 5 other strategies or abilities that each character has, and then those are going to depend on other things. And
Right.
yeah, it's a load off our shoulders to have this finally done.
Especially because sometimes in fights like this, certain stats just don't matter. To some extent. We'll get into that some more when we talk about rings and the way it would interact with Fox's abilities. But yeah, it can make it really deceptive which matches are close and which matches aren't.
Or you'll even have really unintuitive results sometimes, like a character being faster might end up meaning that they have a disadvantage because they end up doing something to provoke the other character too early, or all sorts of weird things like that.
Paper Mario versus Archie Sonic. That was something that came up.
Right. And it just felt like this match had so many weird little unintuitive interactions like that we just weren't able to present in the episode, and honestly probably won't be able to cover in full in this podcast, because we do need to keep things to a reasonable length, or Ink and I will pass out at the microphone.
This is true. Speaking of which, we're going to be kind of going through the script in order and doing a deeper dive into what we're talking about. I'm trying to see if there's anything in the opening paragraph. I don't think there is, so we get the Sonic verse intro, which was so weird that it matched up so well.
Yeah, it was a really, really fun little Easter egg. seemed to cover him pretty well.
I saw some comments that were like, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but this sounds a lot like Into the Spider-Verse.
I love the thought that we could have just unintentionally, word for word, ripped off the intro.
He even had like a popsicle and a Christmas special, and
what we need to do is follow Spider-Verse's lead and release an actual Christmas album for Sonic.
You're gonna actually have me do this. Like it's gonna get too far in my head. Actually, this brings up our first point of commentary, I guess, or research, which is comics. In the original script, it said, "My name is Sonic, Sonic the Hedgehog. I live on the planet Mobius." And then some guy pointed out, that's only Archie Sonic. And I was like, actually, it was in the guidebook for 1, 2, and 3, so I'm fine keeping it in. But he's like, no, the localizers threw it out. But in the original, it definitely wasn't Mobius. And so that was something where there is a difference in the comics, in some of the comics. And people want to know... Or I saw some people wanting to know why we used IDW Sonic and not Archie Sonic.
Yeah, so basically, this comes to a point about our canon in general, the way we treat it at least. We spent a while at the beginning of the series trying to figure out what was canon for the characters we talked about. And for some characters, that's pretty straightforward. Like, some franchises will just have dedicated books by the company saying, here's what's canon, here's what isn't. And that's awesome. And most characters don't have that. And then some characters are even more vague and problematic, like Donkey Kong, where there's not much of a story between his games and you can kind of figure out a canon, but really things are just super confusing to try and look at it in that way. And what we realized after talking about things is just that we don't actually care about the canon story for these characters or franchises. What we're looking at is how strong these characters are, and that's going to depend just on how they're presented, what feats they do.
So less canon story and more canon presentations.
Right. So we're looking at when has this character been officially represented in ways that can tie together with their other official representations. Some of that does overlap with the story, but it's not our primary concern. We've got our own criteria for what makes something canon. You can find that on our website. But basically, we're just looking at how consistent the character is portrayed personality and ability-wise. We're looking at how consistent the world is and a few other things like that.
Right. As well as if there's any like official sign-offs on the character in that piece of media or things like that.
So with Sonic, IDW meets the criteria. It's canon. And especially with Frontiers coming out, it even confirmed that more than we had thought before. Whereas Archie Sonic is definitely just its own thing.
Especially early Archie Sonic, right?
Yeah. You could maybe make the argument that post-reboot it's canon, but then things get kind of weird and how you're splitting up the comic in its one iteration. For what it's worth, we are familiar with post-reboot Archie Sonic, just because we did an episode on him, and nothing there would have mattered.
Which, go check it out. I think that's one of our best episodes. I edited so hard on that one, and so it would make me happy if you watch it.
It's on Crossover Coliseum, not on this channel.
Right.
But yeah, so for Sonic, I think we really ended up using almost everything for him because it met canon in some way or the other. Big exceptions being Archie Sonic and the Sonic the Comic iterations.
As well as the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog.
I don't remember that, actually.
That was the awful one we used to watch.
Oh, the cartoon.
Where it has, like, the bird and...
Right.
What's the other guy? Is he even an animal, or is he just
He's a drill thing. I guess he's kind of like a... shoot. I don't even remember. Mole. That's the word.
Gotcha.
But yeah. That one has a lot of overlap with Archie Sonic.
I wish it counted. I wish that one counted so badly.
Oh, I guess Sonic Boom was a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
I think it got maybe tertiary. Is that what we were thinking?
I think it started verging on secondary for some reason after Frontiers.
Right, because they confirmed that a character.
There was that one feat, was it a laser slowing down? Or...
Yeah, there was an episode right before New Year's where just everything slowed down, except Sonic. and things got kind of weird. We were looking at that. What ended up happening is we had enough time to include Frontiers and even Prime in our episode, but going through all the Boom stuff and reevaluating that with the new information was just a bit outside of what we could manage.
Also, from early calcs, like rough calcs didn't end up being as impressive as it looked.
Right.
With it not being a light speed laser.
Yeah, so we took a look at what people said were most impressive and realized that it wasn't going to be impressive enough to even include. We'll probably take a more detailed look later and decide where it lands officially, but I guess it's in a bit of a limbo state right now.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, what would you say is the next thing to go through?
So you had the cursed clip from Sonic 06, Sonic kissing a girl.
The girl kissing Sonic.
That's right. I guess
he was out for it, which is
I saw a few people in the comments saying that they liked that scene.
Well, moving on. The line that sticks out to me is Sonic has a long history with countless games and abilities, and I actually I went through and measured inch by inch on my computer screen how long our Notion was, which is where we take notes for Sonic's abilities. It really depends on how far you're zoomed in. It was long, though. This would have been a much more effective sentence if I remembered how long.
I mean, I think we had dozens of entries, hundreds. I don't know.
It was hundreds.
It's ridiculous.
So much.
Shout out to the most important Sonic item we did not include in the episode. It was his Nike shoes.
We did include.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, it was in the analysis.
I missed it.
Yeah.
Okay, well then good. I know some guy's been very, very interested in making sure we can present that feat.
One of the reasons I want Sonic versus Mega Man, if he's able to make it to round 2, is Mega Man has Red Bull ice skates. So we can have Nike shoes versus Red Bull ice skates.
Let's get them to compete to sponsor the episode in a bid. Between Nike and Red Bull, whoever gives us the most money, we'll have them sponsor it.
I remember hearing, this is tangential, on Death Battle that they had an offer for someone wanted to sponsor them doing ketchup versus mustard or something like that.
Like the baseball races?
No, the condiments. It was something like that. And they said no. Anyway.
I would take that sponsorship for enough money.
It would be a high amount of money for me. Actually, no. I think I might like the creativity challenge. But yeah, we went through, by we, I mean some guy and you, went through just about everything, I think.
There's just so much. And a huge amount of it is redundant or weird enough to be useless. He's got glue. We used it in the episode, but really, why would Sonic need that? And just all sorts of these weird things that he's had from his huge history. I think he's got a police car from one of his games where he was a cop, and you would drive around trying to arrest people. It was a weird game. But yeah, it's hard enough just to make sure that we get a thorough accounting of what he can do, but then going through and trying to find what actually is relevant here and how they would interact with each other and with Fox and how likely Sonic would even be to use all of these things. It's a tough conversation.
So this is something I know came up with Samus, is that there were certain feats that didn't really hold up, but they were niche enough that people just didn't really look through them. Like the Cooling the Star, is that one?
Yeah.
Where she was just super amped. Are there things like that for Sonic that we found? Or was it less an example of a lack of context and more a difference in interpretation?
There were definitely things like that. So Sonic has just an absolutely massive community behind him. And in that community, there are so many people who do such a great job cataloging what he can do and trying to put calcs to it. And there are also a lot of people who get inspired by that and are kind of learning the way to do it themselves and come up with results that either ignore context or are just really, really radically different than our interpretations. And so part of going through everything that Sonic can do is looking at how other people have interpreted the character and looking at those arguments and trying to see how they hold up. I don't really like the term debunking because I feel like a lot of what a character can do is really just up to interpretation.
Yeah.
Even when you have things that seem really straightforward, it very rarely is. I've seen calcs that, based on very minor differences in interpretations, can get you a result differing in like billions of times difference. So it's hard to say that we can go through and debunk what other people have done, because I don't really believe that you can objectively do that.
Unless it's like a math formula that's just wrong. Like,
yeah, I guess
5 + 5 = 11. But for the most part, I do agree with you. That I don't really think there's objective answers. There's some that I think make more sense than others, which is what we tried to go with. But...
Do you want to talk about some of the common things for Sonic now that we had different takes on?
Oh, yes, let's do it.
Oh, boy.
Should we start with what's in the next paragraph, that he normally operates at 1 to 3 times the speed of sound?
Sure. So that number comes just by looking at Sonic running around in the games and measuring what he can do.
I think Sonic Mania is where we get that Mach 3, right?
So we did in the first episode. I don't think that one actually holds up because he jumps in there. Yeah. Which
implies tandem movement with gravity.
Yeah, and yeah, it's not as fast as the measurement things, or the measurement in the game shows. Yeah. The actual measurable thing that we had that got him the fastest was from Sonic CD, I believe. There's a boss fight where you run on a treadmill, and then you use the friction from that treadmill to melt like this giant steel pillar. Mm-hmm. And the calc for that came out just around Mach 3. Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite instances of Sonic's movement is Sonic Adventure 2, which is the only Sonic game I ever talk about, I've realized. Just because I put so much time into it. I've heard that because your speed can be on par or past the light speed attack, you're moving around those speeds constantly. But then also in round one, in the first stage, you see tandem movement with cars, and you could say, sure, they're moving really fast, but there's signs that say 45 miles per hour on the side of the road. And then the boss you fight has a specific top speed given. But at the same time, the light speed attack is another one that we disagree on interpretation-wise.
Yeah, I mean, that's one that is consistently said to be light speed, both in its name and the few descriptions it has. It just is also consistently demonstrably far slower by basically every measurable metric.
And even if you say that one attack is light speed, it kind of has a very niche usage. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the light speed attack or dash, they're not very useful on their own. What matters with them is that Sonic can run faster than those attacks, right, those abilities. And so that would be saying, well, therefore he can run faster than light speed, which makes the upgrades a little confusing from like a mechanical and narrative standpoint, but I guess that's not necessarily the most important thing. Right. And that's not why we would throw them out. It's just that we really have so many ways to look at those abilities and see that they are slower. I went through the light speed dash in every iteration, and every single one of them had multiple things that we could compare it to that were like a known slower speed.
Meaning like a constant, like gravity is a constant, or movement is something else? What do you mean?
Like gravity is one that came up a lot, or things like the car that you were saying. And I guess we could say maybe literally every car is going past the 45-mile-an-hour speed limit to being the speed of light, which... I mean,
the cops just can't catch them because they're moving the speed of light.
I have driven in cities where that is definitely the case, where everyone speeds. So maybe that's what's going on. But in combination with everything else, it seems like the less likely explanation. Mm-hmm.
To me, that's one of the ones that feels like tricking the game into being fast. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get you. I get what you mean. You can look at it and you can say that you're going to take it at face value, but it leaves really weird implications on the rest of the game, and it feels really disconnected from what you're actually seeing and experiencing.
Let's see. Next on the script, we talk about the Chaos Ram or Wisp scaling. Do either of those spark your interest?
So the Chaos Ram was one of the biggest speed feats we gave him, and I guess the Wisp one was bigger.
The Chaos Ram was actually my Kelk, which makes me happy.
That's the only reason it made it into the episode. Deny it.
I guess I can't, since it wasn't his most impressive one. It looks cool.
It does look cool. All I want to say with that, I saw a lot of people confused about it because it came from Sonic X, and Sonic X isn't canon. But just like we mentioned at the top of the episode, our canon criteria is just a little bit different. Sonic X is very faithful to the games, and it
definitely an official representation of the character, even if it's not the same timeline.
Honestly, one of the better ones.
Yeah.
Even. So there's a lot we can get from Sonic X that is really nice. I feel like it's one of the iterations where they show what Sonic is capable of in the most clear ways. Like in a lot of games, you get really difficult to interpret scenes. But Sonic X is pretty clear and consistent with what it does. With the Wisp scaling, I saw people confused about that because... So the feat that we're talking about is Sonic is able to outspeed these Wisps, and we're getting their speed based on the end of Sonic Colors, where they fly up and teleport all their planets away. And you see in just a few seconds, they're able to get up to the top of the space elevator and just poof everything away. And that's just a casual travel speed thing for them. And it comes out to being very fast.
Right.
The problem with this feat is that there are a lot of intricacies for why it actually matters that we just weren't able to touch on. So first of all, this is the Wisp travel speed, and in the feat itself, Sonic isn't doing anything. So it's a little confusing why he is scaling to that anyway. Even if he did, shouldn't it just be travel speed? And I saw people saying, well, why are we even doing this when we're just relying on a statement that he's faster than these Wisps? And also...
I feel like... Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I do have a comment on that one. I feel like, yes, it's a statement that he's faster, but he also objectively did catch them.
Well, so... The thing is, there is the statement that he's faster from Sonic Colors DS, is where you do that. And that whole scene is very confusing because, like, there's nothing happens. It's like a visual novel. Right. So you can't really see what's going on. And I think that's what people mean when they say, well, why are you using this statement when you don't use other ones? But really, that's just not what we're using. Like you said, he's caught them, which even that is a little dubious because how do we know how fast they're going? That's just an event that happened at some point. But also, that's not the only time we see him outspeeding these Wisps. We see it in... it was the...
IDW?
Well, yes, we see it in IDW several times. And that's what makes it combat speed for him, is that the IDW things, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But also with the re-release of Colors, they released some animated specials. I forget whether they were little mini episodes
you can see
or
clips
advertisements. And in that one, we also have him directly like running in parallel with these things. It's really like a combination of like 5 different feats where he's outspeeding these Wisps in different ways. And the most impressive one is usually the Laser Wisp, which is...
Last time we said that was light speed, right?
Yeah, we said it was light speed. And since then, I have had a lot of people pointing out to me how it doesn't actually meet our light speed criteria. It's got problems where we can see it just not working.
Part of why we bought it is everything seems to slow down. But then you can also measure like tandem movement with tiki torches in the background where the flames are moving the same speed. I don't know if there's other problems you're thinking of.
Yeah, really, it's just, it looked like everything froze, but it was only, we didn't look at it in a very wide context, and doing that shows that it doesn't actually freeze most, well, it does freeze most things, but not enough to really justify it.
It's important to me to be consistent about that, or at least be attentive, because then it really sucks if you use things that aren't slowed down and have it be faster than things that are slowed down or don't treat them equally. Like I'm thinking of Terry's feat, where everything slows down and then he dodges out of the bullet at the very last second. Or in Fire Emblem Awakening, where it looks like a slowdown, but you can also see like literally every single drop of rain has frozen in place while they move.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just a level of intentionality that I feel like if you ignore feels kind of crappy.
Yeah, I've seen people complain about that as like expecting too much from the developers, it being too hard to implement. I
don't believe that.
Yeah, I have a lot of faith that developers are able to just not do anything, which is about what is required for that to happen.
Right.
But anyway, I don't want to get into programming games and what that would involve too much. It's just the Wisp itself didn't really meet the light speed criteria, but it is definitely meant to be faster than these Wisps can normally move, and it's definitely the fastest one of them. And so the combination of catching these Wisps as they run away normally, of dealing with the laser Wisp in combat situations in ways that we can get tandem movement, it all comes together to show him scaling to this feat in a bunch of small different ways, and all together we can say, yeah, this is enough for him to get combat speed from these Wisps and scaling to them. Mm-hmm. It is a little less straightforward than we normally like to use or normally do use, but it's just because it's split up into so many little pieces, which isn't necessarily a problem, except when it comes to how we present it.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to the Wisps before we move on?
I have one general point about it, which is just how we treat things that we've established in an older episode. But right. I think that might be a better discussion with Fox. So
yeah, that's something I got planned in my brain.
Yeah, so we'll deal with that then.
Real fast, his taunt and roll strategy. I don't think that's going to take too much time to talk about. Sonic does have a lot of abilities. In games, he does use them. And usually, especially in extended media, from what I've been able to tell, it really is just taunt and then bash into them and then do it over and over until that doesn't work. Both by what you can see and also by admission of Ian Flynn, who wrote a lot of the comic stuff, and Sonic Frontiers. And while I don't think you can use his stuff as objective feats, I do think hearing his input really solidified that for me, where Sonic is fast enough that he could cycle through a lot of his options very, very, very quickly. And he's also not super likely to start that way.
The one thing that I want to mention about that is in IDW Sonic is actually probably the most clever and tactical he's ever been, which has confused me because Ian Flynn wrote that, and he's got this Sonic who clearly is capable and even good at strategizing. There are points where he's better at it than Tails. And
is Tails a good combat strategist?
Not as much as he is just generally intelligent, but he's usually, like, the way Tails usually fights is the group goes to a fight, and then everyone says, Tails, think of something smart while we keep it busy. And then you cut away from Tails until the group is ready to win. And then you cut back to Tails, and he said, I figured out how to win, and then they win. So it's kind of combat intelligence.
Gotcha.
I don't think it's the biggest feat to be better than him, but I do think that doing so proves that Sonic is operating on a level beyond just smash his face into obstacles until they crumble.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point is, while he does do that, it is still like he always starts the same way, unless something is like very, very obviously not going to work.
Less of a Samus or a Pit and more of a, like, I don't know, Little Mac, who knows his options very well and also generally opens with a similar tactic.
Yeah, that seems fair.
If Little Mac had superpowers. Maybe.
But yeah, so I don't want to say that Sonic is dumb. He definitely can fight. He can fight well, and he can fight in ways that are intelligent. It's just he almost never needs to. And I think that it really has trained him to operate in a very basic way for the most part.
Let's see. Anything else to comment on there for strategy?
I guess one point that'll come in later when we talk about how these two play off each other is that you mentioned how he can cycle through his options pretty quickly. And I just want to point out that even with him, let's see, I think the way that I would describe him most is very reactionary. Even when he is planning to take down a foes, he does it in a way that is reacting to the specific situation that he's seeing and seeing how his options have failed or what the enemy has done. So he generally isn't just throwing things blindly or even predicting what would help. He's doing so in a way that is very tailored to specific situations after they come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's going to be pretty important in this, but we'll get into that later. Next up, I want to talk about his shields just a little bit. And that's more a philosophy of how we think about shields on the team, which is just because someone has a shield, it isn't absolutely invulnerable. Like, picture someone's carrying an iron shield. If Superman punches them, he's going to be able to hit through it. And similar with things like heat shields or cold shields, if you're able to hit beyond what they've endured, you'll be able to get through it. Which was a very important point of interest in this before we got into rings.
And invincibility generally works the same way. It's just a much better shield, really.
Right.
The caveat here is that there are some abilities that have specifically shown to resist being punched through. It sounds like you're wanting to talk about rings a little later, but they have that attribute where they've shown us that even when they don't quite have enough to hold up to an attack, they still prevent it from getting through to Sonic.
Right.
But in general, most of his shields or invincibilities, they don't have anything like that.
Yeah, we'll get into that when we get into rings, which I think is going to be pretty dang soon. Do you see anything in the meantime that you want to bring up in the script?
A lot of stuff talking about specific abilities.
He had so many.
But I don't know if there's much we need to talk about there.
I had 1,600 files downloaded in After Effects that edited into this thing.
That's horrifying. Maybe the magic gloves. I know that a lot of people thought that those were a pretty solid win condition for him. Mm-hmm. The team was pretty split on how solid of a win condition they were.
Part of what was brought up in their favor is he's already wearing it on his hand. Like, if he's trying to think of something to use, it's right there. But it does have some pretty notable downsides.
Yeah, like needing to be like 2 feet away from them and standing completely still.
Right.
Which is not going to be great.
That's going to be in insta-kill range for Fox.
Yeah, no, I think we're good to move on to rings then.
So, rings are a headache.
Basically, I'm sure most people here have played a Sonic game. You know how rings work. You collect them, you get hit, you drop rings instead of dying. They are basically his health bar. Where things get a little more complicated is figuring out how many rings Sonic drops, what happens if you hit him harder than he can deal with, and how many he can have at one time. Rings from game to game will drop in various amounts. Some games you'll drop every ring you have. Some you'll drop like 80% of your rings until you're below a certain threshold. We went with the lowest one we could find.
So we're using him as peak.
Right, which was 10 rings per hit. And we did find this, or we did realize how relevant this would be fairly late into the process. So we didn't have time to do an extremely deep dive into all of his games to see how many rings he loses from each hit. So there might be something that brings him lower.
It would be pretty tough to beat 10.
Yeah. I know some games you'll lose 1 for most enemy hits. But then you'll lose higher amounts for some, and so we just kind of ignored those because we didn't have time to figure out the intricacies. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we went with 10 rings per hit. And the important part of how rings work is that, let's say you're playing in one of those games where you lose 10 rings every time you're hit. If you get hit and you have 5 rings, you don't die. You just drop 5 rings. Mm-hmm. And so what we can see from that is that even when Sonic is hit by something that should bypass the most that he can do, the most he can handle, these rings are acting as a buffer even when they aren't up to their full strength. When they're not providing enough to be his full shield, they're keeping it from going through to Sonic. And so we've interpreted that to mean that it doesn't really matter how hard you hit Sonic. As long as he has rings, he's going to survive at least 1 hit.
Kind of like, if anyone's familiar with Earthbound, the teddy bear in that, if you hit it, it just destroys the teddy bear. And as far as I remember, that damage doesn't carry through to Ness. It's all concentrated on the teddy bear, and once that's gone, it's gone, but Ness is still okay. And similar here, it's less that they're blowing through to Sonic on most hits, and more they're serving as a substitute target.
My favorite visualization of this was from Archie Sonic, where at one point they go to collect rings, and you see them just looping rings all over their body, like this super crappy armor.
That is so dumb.
I should have found that for you to include as a visual, because it was great.
That would have confused people.
Probably. But yeah, anyway, so they're very powerful just with that ability, because it means that even if Sonic has 1 ring, he's surviving any hit.
And this shut down one of Fox's best win conditions that we'll get to when we get to Fox. Mm-hmm. It was, I think without it, Sonic would have lost pretty easily, regardless of stats.
Yeah, the rings were really helping here. Mm-hmm. And not only is it that he can survive a hit, but he drops these rings and can pick them up. And he can create more rings at will by running in a circle, thanks to Frontiers.
Which he can do very fast.
But also, he has 100 million rings. Which is...
Yeah.
Just too many.
So, here's a question I saw come up. Why did he get those instead of the 999 that he normally carries into combat?
Really, what it comes down to is that, like, it makes sense to limit him to what we see him taking into combat. I get why people would want to do that. But what we see him doing is carrying 100 million rings on his person. And even if he's limiting that when he decides to go exploring in a level, there's nothing indicating that, like, if he were to be attacked in his preparatory phase in the overworld, yeah, like, nothing indicates that his rings would suddenly shoot down.
I've got one thing totally holds up, which is you can accidentally drown yourself as Tails in the Hero Garden in the only game I talk about, Sonic Adventure 2, while you theoretically have rings, and glitches are canon.
I don't think that rings usually prevent from drowning.
Oh, really?
That might change game to game, but yeah,
I think you're right. Huh.
But yeah, so it's I get why that is a bit weird. And I tried to go and play around with Sonic 06 to try and figure things out more directly until I realized that it's not on any platforms that are easily available right now.
It's just, rings are a weird topic. Like, they're weird in gameplay. You have things like Ian Flynn saying they're nothing but a gameplay mechanic, but then you have Sonic Prime showing like explicitly they're not, like they actually work.
And while Sonic Prime is the most explicit example of that, it's not the only one. There have been plenty of other instances throughout the games and comics and things. So like Sonic Prime makes it undeniable, I think. But we had a strong argument for that before.
Right.
But that said, even if we were to limit things to 999 rings, it isn't going to be taking away the biggest benefit of rings. It would be much more manageable for Fox. But like that is still going to be making a very significant difference for Sonic.
Right.
And it's going to be enough to eliminate the biggest problems that Fox could pose.
As we get closer to Fox, we're near the end of Sonic's analysis. It came up a few different times. What would happen if Fox flew through Sonic's rings, since he's used to flying through gold rings? We ended up deciding that would probably give him his own durability a few times over with however many he had. But since Sonic's win conditions didn't end up coming down to durability for the most part, it didn't make much of a difference.
And also, even if it did make a difference, what kind of happens in that situation is just that it turns into a fight to see who can stall the longest, which is going to be Sonic, because he can generate as many rings as he wants on the spot. So I think if it ever got down to that point, I don't know, I'd maybe say Fox wins just out of sheer endurance, because he's going to be less tired flying around, but I don't know.
Sonic takes a nap and then Fox just snipes him like it's...
It would be an exceptionally long fight. Sonic has run around for days at a time, and...
Turns out, like, if Mice and Men or something, Sonic collapses by a river. That's as much as I'm getting into that. Anyway, anything else to add with rings before we get into some super forms? Oh, wait, supersonic speed. That is a super form, so...
That is a super form, yep. Maybe the revives. Specifically talking about... I feel like there's some general confusion about the kind of revives we're using in these episodes versus, like, arcade revives.
Yeah. There's a few different revive types that Sonic has as well. Like, a few of them are, like, Kid Icarus revives, where once you hit the bottom of your health, it resets to the top, but you don't actually come back from death. It just gives you more health. Whereas there's others where he dies, and then it literally brings you back. So, even apart from, like, arcade revives, there's different revives within what we used here. I'm also confused what you mean by arcade revives.
Arcade revives are, the way that I think of them, are things like you get enough score, and then the UI lives count goes up, and then if you die, you restart the level, that kind of a thing.
They have that in Star Fox too. They call it spare ships.
Yeah, I think we generally just ignore those for a few reasons. One is that it really feels completely disconnected from the characters.
Yeah.
You can definitely find justifications for some of them on why it kind of makes sense in lore for that to happen. But even in those cases, it usually isn't very tied to the character. They're not doing anything. They're not having anything to make that happen. The bigger issue is that when we have characters reviving, our rule is that they need to be back in the fight within a minute. And so for something that makes you like start a level over, it's gonna just take you to a different place, and maybe you could get back in a minute, maybe you couldn't, but it's just not reliable enough to count. So what we count are revives that are like explicitly an item or an ability that a character has that can revive them on the spot near instantly.
Right.
Or I guess along the lines of the Kid Icarus revives, prevent them from dying. Things get a little more blurry there, but they still get it. It's just that's the difference we see, and why we're not having every character with like 1 million lives, because you can grind it out. Right.
Oh, Sonic has so many things.
Yeah.
Let's see, we got the revives. Okay, what about Sonic's morality?
In terms of would he kill Fox or not? I'm a little torn here. I've always viewed Sonic almost with like Batman morality, where he will refuse to kill someone due to his own interpretations, not interpretations, his own code of conduct, I guess.
Right. But doesn't realize he's like leaving people permanently incapacitated.
Right. He'll do much, much worse things than kill people to incapacitate them or take them out. But he'll never kill them because that's crossing a line. And I don't know, that's just kind of how I've always seen him. I know a lot of people disagree with that because like 99% of what you fight are robots. Mm-hmm. And then the non-robots you fight are just really tough people or creatures. And so maybe he just is not able to kill them despite trying. Mm-hmm. So I guess there is some argument there that maybe he has no problem killing and would go for that. Which is kind of supported by how in your favorite game ever, Sonic Advanced Battle 2. Adventure. Ah, you're right. Advanced is the different one.
The Final Hazard?
No. How you can just destroy fighter jets flying by, being piloted by people.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And to that, I would say I have no idea how to reconcile it. Maybe they are remotely operated, or maybe he is just fine with killing random people.
Does killing a ghost count as killing a person?
I think it's worse, but I don't know if I'm prepared to handle that kind of philosophical debate here.
Gotcha.
In any case, I think there is definitely a good argument you can make that he is willing to kill people. And I feel like even if we have instances of that happening in Sonic Adventure Battle 2, it's just not very consistent with what we usually see from him. Mm-hmm. I think IDW is probably the best demonstration of Sonic's character we ever see, in my opinion. And in that, we have very, very explicit examples of how he thinks about killing living creatures, which is that he'll not even go out of his way to avoid it, but he'll go out of his way to save an enemy from harm that they are either inflicting upon themselves or someone else is inflicting upon them to prevent them from dying.
We kind of showed that in the first animation we did, mm-hmm. where he puts Fox in jail. And then we have Fox slam down the game thing because we had to add more and forgot.
Yeah, that was a... I'm surprised no one commented about why would we give Fox fourth wall breaking abilities.
Yeah.
We didn't. It was just awkward. But yeah, anyway, I think that generally Sonic does not kill people and will do absolutely everything, including massively disadvantaging himself to avoid doing it. Mm-hmm. But I guess I could see someone who believes otherwise, especially if you're not taking into consideration the comics.
Right. Let's see. Yeah, next up we got the Chaos Emeralds. First off, could Fox break them?
Yes, definitely.
But they never break in canon.
So, okay, this one I think is on us. Because what happened is we said Fox can break them.
It was on me.
And we showed the Master Emerald being broken, which was
Sonic Adventure 2 Battle Emeralds. For the Nintendo GameCube, released in 2002.
So, a couple of points here. I think that what you showed is definitely the best visual demonstration of what's happening. We know that the emeralds have broken before. They've broken in Sonic Battle and Sonic Blast. In Sonic Battle, I don't think we ever see or find out how it happens. We just know that they have all been shattered and they are all in shards. So it definitely happened there, and I don't think we know why. So yeah, I don't know what's up with that, but it proves that they can be broken. In Sonic Blast, we see Sonic is taking a nap, and Eggman flies over and shoots just a normal laser attack at him, and it misses, and it hits the emeralds, and it breaks them and scatters them. Mm-hmm. And so that one, we see exactly what happens, which is just a puny little laser breaks them. And in case we think, well, this is Eggman and he can do things like blow up stars without any emeralds, so of course he would be able to create something super powerful. We fight him later in the game. We see the same laser. It doesn't do anything. There are no feats to it. So as far as we can tell, it's just like the emerald's durability is 0. They have no durability feats.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say maybe they get some durability from channeling huge amounts of energy through them, but things with that are kind of weird. So I don't know if that is great, especially in the face of a very obvious instance of them being shattered pretty weakly.
Right.
And then with the Master Emerald, there are a lot of things implying that it is stronger than the Emeralds, including the fact that it can just shut all of them down if it wants. It's much more massive, and it is generally kept out in the open, which kind of implies that it is...
doesn't have a reason to hide.
Right, like it's not really vulnerable to anything. Where, like, if Eggman's puny little lasers are breaking the normal emeralds, then this thing would need to be worried about, like, hail.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that not being a problem, I think it's fair to say that the Master Emerald durability is higher. So I don't have a problem with the graphic you showed, but I do get why it was very confusing to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they definitely shatter. They can be restored. Sonic Battles shows us just by bringing the shards next to each other. They kind of mend themselves. But also Sonic Blast shows us that when they break, they scatter.
You know so much Sonic stuff.
Yeah, I hate it. I don't hate it. I just wish my mind was filled with more useful things.
All right, so we got Sonic transformations. So the gems, I'm not sure if you're all aware, if you're Sonic lore buffs, it can transform him into Supersonic. It generally takes him around half a second. We went through and measured all of them. It also turns him into Supersonic, where for a while, didn't we think Supersonic was mostly a boost in durability and AP? Or am I getting confused with something else?
No, you're right. In almost every instance of Supersonic, he just doesn't go faster than base Sonic. In fact, most of the time he goes measurably slower.
Mm-hmm. And we're making people mad with this, so
we're
going to pull it back in just a second.
The problem is that most of the time you get Supersonic, you then fight one boss, and then Supersonic is done. Mm-hmm. The 2D games...
Because he's not carrying his 100 million rings.
Yeah. The 2D games generally let you have a little more rain, and in those you tend to go faster, but it's not much faster, and is still slower than Sonic's biggest showings elsewhere. Where Supersonic really gets his speed is from a couple of cutscenes and IDW. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, he seems to operate much slower in this form, but he can definitely go faster.
Here's something weird. I think if we asked Sega how fast Sonic is, they'd say like 700 miles per hour. And if we asked them how fast Supersonic is, they'd say light speed. I might be wrong, but that's my hunch.
They've said as much a few times, but also they change their answer every few years. So
yeah, if we go with the light speed statement, though, we'd have to go with the 700 miles per hour. So you have to give what you take.
Yeah. It's a little hard to pin down for sure. And I think it pinpoints how frustrating Sonic games are, because why on earth would you give someone Supersonic just for a slow, boring boss fight? It's the lamest way to do it.
Oh, do you want to hear a mistake I made?
Sure.
In 39% the speed of light, I'm almost positive I forgot to put in the speed modifiers he gets from speed.
Yeah, I actually had someone message me asking about that.
Yeah, same with Sonic's base speed. I think I just forgot to stick that in there.
I actually don't think Supersonic gets any multipliers, though.
Not unless we carry over his items, but yeah.
Which I guess we can talk about in a sec after we finish speed here. But yeah, basically, so we have the feat from IDW is what it was that gave us that one, right? 39% speed of light.
He flies around the planet, I think, 7 times, which is
a ton.
symbolic of the 7 Chaos Emeralds.
And is also nonsensical, because it was only one continent under threat, so he's just showboating. But he does it, so
yeah,
I can't say much. But yeah, so he gets that. We know that he is very fast. I guess I don't have much more to say about that. It's a fairly straightforward event.
Right. Should we talk about hypersonic for a second?
Sure.
I feel like Hypersonic is almost certainly intended to be stronger and potentially faster, and it's unclear how much, and it didn't end up mattering.
And also is never actually demonstrated.
Yeah, I want it to come back again. But once it does, Supersonic basically won't matter anymore, I think. Unless it has a pretty different power set.
That's how they should do it. I don't know if that's how they will.
I think Supersonic
just
should be
don't
the
think it
faster
will.
one. Hypersonic should be the more powerful one, but doesn't have the same speed. Something like that.
Hypersonic should just be ultrasonic, but with a better design.
Ultrasonic's so stupid. So yeah, the only difference he has is he has an attack that covers the whole screen. It's like a big flash. But that's the only measurable thing we have so far.
I've seen people confused about whether or not it's canon. It doesn't really matter. The game it comes from is canon according to our scale, so we're fine using that.
By which you mean, is it canon to the mainline story? Probably not. Is it canon, or potentially, is it still an official representation of him? Yes.
Right. And most of the reason people think it isn't canon is because it just hasn't come back. So it's
Speaking
pretty
of
dubious
which,
anyway.
let's talk about Werehog, Excalibur, and Dark Spine Sonic, who I hate has bare feet.
Does he really? I didn't even
Yeah, and
notice.
I hate it. And he boxes people, I'm pretty sure. He doesn't, anyway.
I don't remember that fight super clearly. I remember the events around it a bit, but
Dark Spine makes no sense.
that game makes no sense.
So the question is, why did we give them these?
So the storybook ones, Dark Spine and Excalibur, they explicitly take place in like another universe / inside a story. I guess it's a little clear where the boundaries of those two things cross, but it's not the normal world, at least.
Mm-hmm.
They're not things that he should normally be able to get outside of those books. At least you would think so. And then the mobile games come along and they're like, no, go for it.
Right.
And that's basically it. There's
But
some...
even if it didn't, I'd still see it as an official story of Sonic. Even if it's in a storybook. I don't know if the rest of the team would agree with me.
Yeah, we didn't, I guess, have that discussion. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. I don't think either of them matter that much.
Yeah.
They're both just worse Supersonics. I know there are some arguments that Dark Spine is way crazier.
Looks so
But-
dumb. What about Dark Sonic? I saw that come up a few times from IDW.
That's not IDW. That's Sonic the Comic, I
Sonic
think.
the Comic. I know what that is.
I'm not familiar with it. So Sonic the Comic is like British RG Sonic, you can think of it.
Gotcha.
If I'm understanding it right. It's just another incarnation where, do you remember that lore Bible that leaked for the very first game? And how it was just the stupidest thing ever?
Yeah.
That is Sonic the Comic. They're
Oh,
just like,
really?
this is what we're doing now.
I love that lore
So
Bible.
it is,
If you don't know what it is, look it up.
yeah, it's too problematic. They do things like Supersonic is an entirely different entity than Sonic. And I think he's evil. I don't know Dark Sonic well. I just know that he comes from something that we're not using.
Then
The other thing here is Werehog. He doesn't matter much.
right.
I actually don't remember where we landed using it. I
We
think
said
there's
he requires the Chaos Emeralds being corrupted or something like that.
Yeah,
So he couldn't
so-
coexist with Supersonic.
they in crap. What was the game? Why am I blanking on the name?
Unleashed?
Yes, on Sonic Unleashed, he has the Chaos Emeralds drained at the very beginning, and then he gets poisoned with like Dark Gaia's energy, and that's what turns him into the Werehog. And over the course of the game, you get the emeralds back, and once they get their power back, you are cured of Werehog. So there is definitely a lot of implications that it can't coexist with Supersonic, and much to the surprise of everyone, we tend to think Supersonic is more powerful than Werehog.
Werehog is ugly, it has a bad moveset, and it isn't impressive.
So, I don't know. We might be able to justify using it, but really, it doesn't do much. And there's problems with it anyway.
Alright, so this last paragraph, how deep do you want to go with Time Eater and Solaris?
So, I
feel like we could go deep, and it's also a fairly... Like, you can summarize it pretty quick, too.
Yeah, so what it comes down to is Sonic has a whole lot of feats that people have interpreted anywhere from putting this guy in, like, planet-busting strength in base form to I've seen people arguing that he can like warp multiverses in his dreams in base form. Just no effort whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
The arguments are very varied. They come from all of the games, and
I can actually see the argument for several of these.
yeah, I'm not saying that they are bad arguments. Like, he fights a lot of very, very powerful enemies who are presented as massive threats to universes. So it's not crazy to think that he is super powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But what it all comes down to is that when we are looking at these characters and the people that they fight, what we look for is concrete demonstrations of what they're capable of. And Sonic's enemies don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Sonic as a franchise is full of statements that are hard to trust, hard to verify, or verifiably false. And so what happens is you have a lot of reliance on these statements that can put Sonic at really, really powerful levels. And as we go through to try and say which of these are trustworthy, we just find out that at least according to the way that we interpret things to our standards, none of them are. So this ranges from things like Sonic having 10 billion lasers across his games that he dodges, that a lot of people take to mean he should be operating faster than light easily at base. But then we looked through every one of them, and none of them operate anywhere close to light speed, or the ones that do operate at light speed are just not things that he could scale to because he doesn't move with them.
So it basically comes down to, if there's a laser and it doesn't operate where it's looking like light speed, do you bring the rest of the universe up to light speed, or do you bring the laser down to how it's measured?
Mm-hmm. And we talked about that a little bit with the light speed dash and stuff.
Right.
We tend to lean on the side of bringing down the lasers. And so, like, we look through that and say, okay, he doesn't have any reliable laser dodges. So he can't scale to light speed from that. We'll look at things like Solaris or Time Eater, and we look through these arguments and just...
It reminds me of Terry.
How so? Because he fought the God of War?
No, at the end of King of Fighters 14, I think, they're like, oh boy, we're fighting, this is fun. And then, like, the sky opens up and there's this dimension and there's, like, this god figure who you have to fight a bunch. And then all of a sudden you beat her and everything explodes and there's, like, dimensions cracking. And then they're like, oh boy, you won the fighting tournament. And you just can't measure it. It's probably impressive.
See, there are things like that for sure, but even with the most impressive enemies you fight as Sonic, they generally don't even have that. Like, Solaris, just, he wakes up and then all of a sudden everyone is somewhere different. And you have some speculation on what happened in-game, and I know that people generally really trust what Eggman says, but also, I think literally everything he says in that game is wrong. And not even that I just don't trust him, like, blatantly contradicted by the events of the game. And so, nothing is happening with any of these characters. We can't say that he scales to things that aren't going on. And I get how you could fairly easily craft arguments for massive power levels happening in these fights. And I think that even some of those have some things that I don't agree with, but I also don't think it's worth getting into. What it mostly comes down to here is how much you trust the statements in the Sonic games, how much you trust the story it's crafting about these enemies, and how much you value that over what we actually see demonstrated. And for us, at least, we tend to really value what we see demonstrated a lot more than what we hear said.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, like, there's a lot of feats that people think are very impressive that we just didn't even mention, like restoring color in Sonic Generations.
That's so weird.
It really is. or outrunning a black hole made of wisps, or escaping the void dimension thing in Sonic Forces, or all sorts of these things. And it's not that we haven't looked at them. I can almost guarantee that we have looked at every argument for Sonic that exists.
Have you heard about Carl Jung?
I'm not touching that.
I know.
But yes, we have even looked into that.
We'll bring him up when we talk about Joker.
I hope not. I guess we can't avoid it.
No.
But yeah, I don't know. We've looked into so many things, and it would take too much time to go through these arguments one by one, and to give our opinions and to say why we don't think it holds up. And what it all comes down to is this difference in interpretation. So it really doesn't even matter what the detailed arguments here are. Like I could probably talk for a couple hours about Solaris alone, but it's not going to really benefit anyone.
Right. It will, yeah. If you're enjoying what we've been doing so far, please consider checking this out on Patreon. Anything that helps, even the lowest tier, you get access to everything. It's just donate what you can afford. Or almost better yet, just go watch one of our videos. That potentially helps us more than Patreon, just rewatching stuff.
Yeah, if you could just loop it for the rest of your life, that would do pretty well for us.
Yeah. Anyway, it is time for Fox McCloud. Oh gosh, the dark horse, the underdog here. So when we originally made this matchup, I didn't think that Fox stood a chance, because nobody looks into Star Fox, and so people will say things like, "Of course, Sonic stomps." I saw some comments like, "It's a literal cosmic deity versus a mercenary."
I've seen a lot of comments along the lines of, Sonic has destroyed like 40 robots, so how could he not destroy an R-Wing? So, like, even on the low end, there's a lot of people who are like, Fox is literally nothing more than these basic enemies that Sonic is trashing through all the time.
Right. I don't love the Star Fox games, but it's such a cool franchise, and people should talk about it more. There is, I think, a bit less to cover for him going through this. He's got a lot of things that need talked about, but a lot less depth and way less games.
One thing I want to talk about before we get into specifics with him is how things have changed since Wolf's episode.
Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up.
This is something that I think we went back and forth on how to deal with internally for a bit, because on the one hand, we knew it would be confusing for people following closely to see like the max speed of the R-Wing changing radically between episodes without any explanation. But on the other hand, it would be much more confusing for a wider audience to spend a long time going over old feats and then saying, but that's not actually how things are. And so it was a really difficult trade-off to make, and one that we understood would make some confusion. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit now to alleviate that.
There's a commenter called The Greatest Ever, who is, I think, the only person I've seen in the comments who probably knows more about Star Fox than us versus Wise. Like, they went very, very, very deep into it. There's probably people who know more, but...
Yeah, I was always really impressed with his comments.
Yeah. And I think he was very confused, or I guess I don't know, about what happened here. For example, we had Fox's speed way, 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 way higher. Or not Fox's.
Wolf's
speed way higher. And this came down to the Star Fox 2 feat, where they fly across the Lilat in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah, to go into more detail, since that just wasn't in this episode, we didn't use it, right?
The Star Fox 2 feat?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we did.
Oh, we did?
That was their ramming attack speed.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Initially, though, we had used it for combat speed because you could fight missiles that were shot at those same speeds. And we had some justifications, ways to measure it, that put it at just insane combat speeds.
And it still is there. The biggest issue that we had, I guess there were two. The first was the time frame over what was happening. at first we assumed it was seconds because it's a timer. There's nothing to indicate it's anything other than that.
Well, also it counts up in seconds.
Right.
Like in the overworld, it is clearly counting in seconds, and then when you get into a fight, it's 1/10 of that speed.
Right.
So it just looks like it's still seconds, but it is going slower for perspective's sake.
And we had someone in the main server, I think it was Rokum21, who was like, how do you know it's not minutes or hours? And I was like, oh, come on, it's minutes. And then I actually looked into it.
I know, we were like, what a stupid question. It's so obvious.
Right. I'm sorry for thinking it was dumb, Rokum. Like, that was a legitimate question.
It really, I think stupid questions like that actually tend to be the most important ones to ask.
That's why we dove into it. I went to the pre-release build just to look and be like, look, it's always been seconds. And I ended up finding this site that documented every single build of Star Fox 2 along its development cycle, which we can't really use development builds to say what happened in the final one, but it can at least inform it. And it actually started off as hours, I believe. But then they moved it up to seconds, and then they had it as seconds again, but then they moved it up to minutes, and then minutes and minutes, and then it changed to a clock symbol with the exact same format as minutes. So it's clear that they were actively thinking about the speed here. The last one that had minutes before the clock symbol was about 2 months before. So I imagine that was probably localization purposes.
And I think we did settle on minutes for our interpretation. It felt like the most consistent way to handle it. And like
including with how it counts up.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, it's not necessarily like we can't necessarily trust these dev builds as being completely right, but it did seem to be a very consistent pattern.
And it at least showed intentionality.
Right. So that at least is already like making the feat 1/60th of what it used to be.
Right, and you could make an argument for either. It just felt more honest to go with minutes, which still is way faster in travel speed than anything Sonic has reacted to or pulled off.
Right. And then the bigger issue that ended up just completely killing it for combat is that initially we had used some fairly esoteric ways to figure out how fast Fox could have been going when he's fighting these missiles. And we did so because there's not really a frame of reference. You're just in the middle of space. There's nothing around you. You can't measure how fast you're going very easily. And so we kind of just threw in the towel and said, okay, I guess we're going to use these weirder methods to get a ballpark. What we later realized due to a user named Advert pointing it out to me, he helped a little bit with the episode on the team for a little while, but has always been someone very active in the community, especially in Calyx. He pointed out you can just fly towards the other ships, and that completely gets rid of any issues you have with perspective or lack of reference frame, and you can get a very clear measurement on the speed, and it is very slow.
It would also make like light year long lasers, but what we ended up doing, we talked about that as an interpretation, but what we ended up doing as a team is using its I guess what we really talked about is even if it was there, it still would be able to use its super fast travel speed as a ram for combat. We ended up saying it's just keeping pace with the interplanetary ballistic missile. It would have no reason to slow down. But also, if we're doing that, then those turns that it's making are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles, to where that's not relevant in combat.
Yeah. The other, like you're hinting at there, to go a little more detail, the other big detail or important factor here is just that we used it for combat speed before because it was a fight, it was combat, and so it felt obvious, and we just didn't really give it enough critical thought.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, it's not tight enough to matter in a normal fight. At most, this is proof that that Fox can keep up with things that go very fast, but it's not meaning that he can outspeed his opponents because he would just be too far away from them to matter.
Right. Let's see. The other changes from Wolf's episode are durability of the R-Wing. We use the planet exploding. This planet is huge. The way that we calculated the size was how long Fox can drive through it before the timer runs out, because it's clearly supposed to be huge. It's hard to know how huge. That came out just larger than the second biggest thing in Lila, I believe.
I think you're thinking of the spaceship or the
Bull space station.
Station, right? But then you remember
that ended up being space meters,
right?
Okay.
Yeah, so it is gigantic. You get a point right before the explosion where you're literally just flying straight through the center of the planet, just in this giant, super long tunnel. And so we calced that, and it came out to be massive. It actually ended up being way, 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 way bigger than it was in Wolf's episode. And the big problem with this is that Fox is on the surface. So even though it is much more impressive to blow up the planet now, he's further away from the explosion, making it less energy that he's enduring.
Right.
I don't actually remember how the stats stacked up between the episodes, but that's at least why there's a difference between them.
It ended up being less meaningful than ramming into a meteor at their maximum combat speed, because hitting something at 40 times the speed of light is probably going to outdo that.
Yeah.
The next thing to bring up is the AP, which I actually think is higher than it was before. For Fox.
Yeah, with the ramming attack.
Yeah, because Fox's one-shot weapons scaled to the ramming attack, or at least what it could endure there.
So there's a few points that I want to talk about here.
Okay.
So first of all, when we say one-shot weapons, that was an abbreviation that we used that I think came across as being confusing, because it kind of sounds like we're saying these can just kill anything in one shot, and that's not what we mean. What we mean is that we're scaling these weapons to the Arwing's durability because they can one-shot an Arwing. So they're clearly blowing past its max durability, and are therefore very strong. We're not saying that they could one-shot any enemy no matter what. It's just a convenient way of referring to this class of weapons because there's a couple of them. The other thing I want to talk about is you mentioned ramming at 40 times the speed of light being very impressive. And I don't think we've talked about kinetic energy in that context. Do you think we should get into that?
Basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the formula for kinetic energy breaks apart once you go past the speed of light.
Right.
But it can be somewhat mitigated by changing the speed of light to what it would function as in that universe.
Yeah, so I don't want to get deep into the science behind this because it is confusing. But when you look at the equation for kinetic energy, you're going to see two of them, depending on where you're looking. The first one is Newtonian kinetic energy, which looks very simple and doesn't look like it would break no matter how fast something's going. But that formula is just a simplification of a much longer, more complicated formula that does break at the speed of light. And so what that means is that even if you're using Newtonian kinetic energy, if you go past the speed of light, it kind of breaks some hidden variables that you can't normally see, and it just isn't usable. And that's why most people don't ever use kinetic energy at speeds faster than the speed of light. But that bothered me because there's a lot of situations where it makes a lot of sense, like both characters in this fight. So what I did is I just kind of tweaked the fundamental variables for the universe a little bit to make it okay. And that sounds really weird and janky, and it does lead to some unintuitive results. But I spent quite a while seeing where, like, what things that would affect in the universe, how things would be impacted, and really, for the most part, it would be unnoticeable for the context we're using things in. What that means is that we can now get kinetic energy using this new method for things that go beyond the speed of light. It also solves the problem of things that are getting close to the light, close to the speed of light, being just infinitely impressive. So when we say, I mean, you guys saw the stats for the episode, Fox ramming into something at, what did it end up being? Like hundreds of thousands of times the speed of light?
For the meteor?
Whatever we gave his max AP for. The rolling attack was using travel speed.
The rolling attack was using his travel speed. That would probably destroy the Arwing, but it can rebuild itself. The one we see it endure is at 40 times the speed of light.
I'm just, even with the travel speed, which was really, really high, way above the speed of light, it ends up being pretty conservative results for how powerful that would be. A lot more so than you would normally think if anyone is familiar with
Still enough to one-shot Sonic. But,
right, but it's not like... What happens is we're now able to handle faster than light kinetic energy without completely trivializing anything else, and doing so in a way that is relatively accurate, scientifically speaking. It's not... Like, it's definitely not perfect. We're making things up here. But doing so in a way that isn't, like, obviously problematic. I can give more detail on that if anyone is interested. Ask me in the Discord. But it is a little confusing, so I don't want to get into the details too much here. I just want to point out that we do have a process here, and that's why you're seeing some of these kinetic energy feats for faster than light stuff.
And there are still a few different things to cover for differences. So we got that AP. A question that I see here is, why was Fox's durability lowered to meteor level rather than planet level? And I think using those labels can be misleading. Destroying a meteor isn't nearly as impressive as vaporizing a meteor. A planet exploding isn't nearly as impressive when you're thousands of miles away from the center. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on those labels being applied to the feats?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of it being confusing when you look at something and you see us saying Fox endured this planet exploding, and also his best feat is crashing into a meteor. And it's unintuitive to say, why would you do things that way? Like, it doesn't make sense at a glance. The reason is because we did the math, and the meteor was more impressive.
Yeah.
And it, like, I get why it's unintuitive, but that's just kind of how things work sometimes.
Right, and it can be frustrating. But yeah, looking at the object itself isn't always a good measurement.
And even with Wolf, I don't think we had the same issue there, but it's not like Wolf was way stronger because we only presented the planet thing for his durability.
Right.
Even though the numbers changed, he was never, like, enduring an explosion that could destroy a planet.
Right. And then the last thing I want to bring up is, can't Fox destroy the Arwing 2, or can't Fox with his blaster destroy an Arwing? And the answer is yes, but Arwings are also weak to sustain damage. Even at their fastest, they can be worn down by being shot over and over. You can see that with the Wolfen 2. So yeah, unless he's one-shotting it, which he can do with some weapons, his base durability and normal AP isn't going to scale to that.
And generally, we don't scale anything in that way. We tend to scale things if you can one-shot someone or something, but not just from dealing damage.
Right.
Because it can lead to some weird and unintuitive results. And that's just a matter of taste.
All right, I think we're ready to go through this script. Luckily, there isn't nearly as much. Real fast, in the animation, Fox gets torn up by a black hole. His ships. That was mostly because it looked cool. We normally try to be better than that, but also sustained damage from... I said something incorrect, I think.
Yeah, so the reason that one worked is because the black hole thing that Sonic turned into, it's not doing damage. It's more transmutation or almost like BFR. It's not something that is interacting with AP, and that's why it works against the Arwings.
I was incorrect. It does look cool, though. Let's see. Vaporizing Andross, I feel like it's pretty straightforward.
What about his metal legs? Why don't we mention that?
Fox doesn't have metal legs. Gosh, it's so stupid in Death Battle. It ticks me off. He gets his legs blown off, and then he just stumps his way over to Bucky and shoots him.
That's like Ink's one criticism about Death Battle.
Yeah.
And I hear it every day.
Anyway, with his staff, something I saw is, couldn't Sonic just steal it? And with that one, actually, no, he can summon that back to himself.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it just materializes either on his back or in his hand. Yeah.
Ink says he doesn't care about the Star Fox games, but he's our expert. He knows that well.
I have played through all of them. Yes.
Even the tower defense?
Yes, Star Fox Guard.
Guard, that's it.
That one I found out that there's a planet shaped like
That's where that came from.
Slippy's uncle's face. Let's see. Sonic could probably go fast enough to take Fox's weapon. Even if he could, though, or actually, let's say Fox just blitzes let's say Fox just blitzes Sonic in base form. I don't think he's shooting Sonic. Unless he's specifically held back, I think he's calling in his R-Wing right away. The only times he hasn't done that is when he's been explicitly held back from doing it.
Yeah, Fox is weird because he's got like a fair amount of things on the ground. Like he's a capable ground fighter, and he also hates it. Mm-hmm. Not as much as Falco, I guess, but like he will only do it if it's a necessity.
Let's see. Looking through the rest of these, I wish we got to use Fox's dinosaur thing, but it just is so irrelevant. Okay, Star Fox 64 3D multiplayer that's a mouthful.
Sure is.
It has a bunch of weapons like the transposer that swaps your position with an enemy, or I see them called both dead weights and speed burrs. They latch onto your opponent and bring them to a stop. And then there's the Firebird, which instantly kills anything near it. That one you could either determine, or you could either call it AP or an instant kill. And there were a few different reasons we went with insta kill, such as like the distance not really mattering, or the description in game calling it an instant kill. That was the more relevant one. But yeah, those things were pretty relevant. I saw someone bring up, why would you use those? They're probably hitting harder in training than they are actually. I don't think I'd buy that.
Why? Why would they do that? I mean, I don't know if it's a relevant discussion, but
yeah. I also seen some people say, couldn't it just be them playing a video game of themselves? And the answer is no. We see them playing a video game, and when they play it, it is Star Fox 1, a modified version of it.
That they use for training, to be fair.
Use Star Fox? No, they're just gaming.
All right. You know better.
I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong here.
I remember a fair amount of implication that they were using video games to train, but also
you can see evidence of those moving over from the training mode to story mode, like the Space Dynamics homing launcher.
Yeah, they definitely implement things from it, and they definitely train in real life as well. So I don't know, even if they're using games as part of their training, I don't think it's like all they're doing is playing Call of Duty.
Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing too much else that needs covered with Fox's section. A lot of his stuff was straightforward, just kind of there's a lot.
I saw confusion about the Falco stuff, especially the like flying around the light torpedo explosion thing.
Like how we got those numbers?
Yeah, how we got those numbers and why it was relevant when you see someone like blocking the light with their hand. What are we doing with that number?
Gotcha. So to calc that one, it's a really weird one, and it's also kind of the best we had. Falco's flying into this thing that Fox drops. He brings his hand up and immediately steers away from it. The R-Wing has two controls. It has a speed control in one hand and a directional control in the other. The hand that he brought up was the directional control, which you can just see by other shots where you can see which hand is grabbing what. In order to steer out of the way, he would have had to do he would have had to get it back down and turn it, which you can see him swipe around. And then we can look at the appearance between the light torpedo set up there and the one in game, and generally measure the distance using an R-Wing as a base and some approximations. It's not exact, but like I said, it's kind of the best we got. Does that cover what you were talking about?
I think so. What about, do you want to talk about Starlink at all? I know we've talked about how we kind of have our own criteria for canon and whatnot, but also this is just like it's a game without Star Fox that also has Star Fox in it sometimes.
Right.
So what's going on with that?
It's also so Starlink is a game without Star Fox, but they also canonically take place within the same universe, which is our own. Don't want to think about that too much. But also, there's specific stories that are exclusive to Star Fox. The original team for Star Fox was heavily involved and kind of had their cosign on it. They took a lot of care to make it as clear as possible, not only with respect to the characters, but which timeline it was in. Referencing Papatoon, which I'm almost positive is just in the original timeline. And... yeah, anything else I need to touch on there?
I mean, why do you think you say they're taking a lot of care for the characters, but I guess why would that matter if it's not really their game? Do you think it does enough justice to be counted as one?
I think so. One of our criteria is making sure the characters are consistent. And so it definitely meets that there. The characterization is really good. You could argue it's not as good for Wolf, but generally across the board, it's really solid. But then that mixed with the heavy involvement of the original team on Star Fox and needing to get Nintendo's approval. And in fact, it even started by Nintendo coming to them. All of that being mixed together with them having their own story within the game that's separate from Starlink, or I guess supplemental to it, all kind of comes together to form that picture.
You want to talk about some of the gear from that game?
It's crazy.
Yeah, we mentioned it a bit in the episode, but I don't think we really did justice to just how weird crap is.
So he has like speed sapping things, like I said. He has weapons that can instantly heat ships up to melting temperatures. He's got weapons that shoot something and freeze to near absolute zero, which is insanely cold. You want to talk about just how cold that is?
So I think just to mention real quick, the heating you're talking about brought him up to 1,500 degrees Celsius, if I'm remembering right, which is super hot. Then the freezing would bring them down to negative 273 degrees Celsius, which is, I believe it's 0.15 degrees above absolute zero. 1.3. Which is, yeah, I mean, absolute zero is as cold as is possible. It's cold enough that cold isn't really even like an accurate description of what's going on at that point. When something gets cold, it means the molecules inside of it are less excited. They move around less. And at absolute zero, there's just no movement. This is cold enough that like new states of matter start to exist. Physics starts operating differently. Like it's hard to explain just how crazy things would get. And that's absolute zero, to be clear. Negative 273 is very cold, but not cold enough to actually start exhibiting those differences.
But still enough to instantly kill Sonic if he touches the R-Wing, unless he has rings, which have been shown to take the damage for him rather than just acting as a durability buff.
And what do you mean touching the R-Wing? I don't know if we talked about that enough.
So I did mention it in the episode. We have... the R-Wing has certain weapons and abilities it can upgrade itself with, and some of them happen when enemies touch the R-Wing. One of those, I believe, is the time stop, and the other one, I believe, is the freezing. And then also, when it drops below 30% health, it unleashes that in an area of effect. So there's a few things that Fox can do to guarantee if he's touched by someone, that's applied to them.
And even if we say, well, Fox wouldn't start out with that, he's got 13 ships that rebuild themselves instantly. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we justified that very much either, but like we see in cutscenes what that looks like, and it really just, they're teleporting the entire new ship into place instantly. It's super quick. So like even if Fox had to burn through a couple, he would be able to change the configuration of any of his ships on the fly, instantly have any of his weapons or armor or things switched out, and be able to adapt it to the fight. And would be very strong, except, like you said, Sonic has the rings that provide a very strong buffer for him. Even if he were to get frozen or time stopped, they'd provide a buffer to help him survive whatever Fox could do in that moment. But still, even with all of that, is a very strong option for Fox that just kind of passively protects him.
Right. I feel like it's one of the options that without rings, it doesn't matter how fast Sonic is. As long as it's equipped, that is. Because by touching him, he dies. If it's equipped. But with rings, it really puts a damper on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rough. Let's see, do we have anything else to talk about with Fox here?
Let's see, I just see us talking about the meteors again, which I know there was confusion. Is that meteor level? We treated that as vaporization rather than just breaking them or pulverization because there's nothing left but blue vapor. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's way more impressive than just shooting it apart, right?
Right. I don't know how to classify is this meteor level or not. That's just not really how we think of things.
Right.
It's impressive.
What system does Versus Battle Wiki use? Do they use joules per centimeter squared, or
they use joules, or well, TNT equivalent usually, but joules is the base of that.
How does applying it to centimeters square affect the number?
It'll reduce it a bit. It's usually not going to be a massive difference because most surface areas are going to be maybe a reduction of a few hundred or a few thousand times, but it'll really depend. The R-Wing, like the R-Wing crashing into something, it's huge, so its surface area is reducing things by a much larger amount than most things we're doing. Generally, things will be close enough that you can kind of eyeball it between the two, but really it's enough of a change that I wouldn't take anything as a one-to-one comparison.
Yeah. Then I think the only thing left is the verdict. We went fairly in depth here. Basically, it comes down to Fox is fast enough that he could blitz someone. It's like if you shot a bullet at me, I'm not getting out of the way. But if I could run significantly faster than you could twist your gun, I'm not going to be hitting you either.
Right. I don't know. I saw a lot of people say they really wanted us to dive more into this explanation. But I think the biggest point of confusion that I saw is that we would show these stat screens, and Fox really had the biggest advantage in those. He is ahead in most stats and competitive in the rest.
And either wins or converts 3 out of 4 scenarios.
Right.
Much.
It's just the problem is that this fight, every fight, but especially this one, is not decided just by the stats alone. There are so many factors to go into play here. And so, yeah, it looks like Fox is hitting much harder, but you can't take that in a vacuum. You have to pay attention to, well, how likely is he even going to be to land these hits with Sonic fast enough to dodge? If he does hit the shots, does it even matter because of the rings? And you need to take into account, like, how well they would strategize.
Do they even need AP?
Right. Like, it's far more nuanced than I think people are reducing it down to.
Right.
And yeah, Fox has a lot of advantages here. We really mean it when we say this was a close fight.
I think if it was a Star Fox story, Fox would win. If it was a Sonic story, Sonic would win. Which I guess is true in any capacity, but I just mean like it's really, really, really close. Like we were at basically a deadlock for months. In the actual debate, it took in the last formal debate call, we were at a deadlock for hours essentially, where we had equal people on both sides before we finally came to an agreement. It was just very close.
And even that agreement, like, I don't think that anyone on the team regrets what happens, who the victor is. I think we all agree there, but I don't think that we all are entirely on the same page. Like, I think that there are definitely some of us who think, yeah, Fox probably wins this more often. But I don't think... The problem is just that when it is so close like this, when we each think that like one character is going to win 55% of the time or something like that, it just becomes so hard to call the victor. What it ended up coming down to here is just that we felt like, I mean, you did a great job explaining things in the verdict, so that's our reasoning. But what it comes down to is that Fox, I think, is the stronger contender in this fight, but that Sonic's specific advantages here are enough of a counter to Fox's strengths that it gives him the time and the opportunity he needs to come up with a counter to them. And that the way their abilities interact, the way they play out, just gives Sonic this slight edge in not giving Fox as much an opportunity to react or figure out all the weird crap he could do. And just kind of having more options at his disposal to deal with Fox's crap.
And he wasn't going to be winning with AP. And it really didn't come down to that, which is part of why it made it such a difficult call. It's because he had so many different ways to get around that, and ultimately could iterate through it faster than Fox could. But I really think it was going to come down to a matter of seconds who wins.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a very close one, and I think that there are probably some weirder things that might have happened. Like, I mean, maybe theoretically Fox could have just like got Sonic stuck on the wing of an R-Wing and then flown into the sun. And maybe that would have helped. I don't know.
Right.
Of course, then Super Sonic would probably be fine and get out of that. I don't know. But the problem is just that we would talk about things and we'd try to figure out a victor, and it would branch off into like 8 different directions on how someone would react, what would happen at that point. And depending on all of these different factors, different people would win.
Right.
They're both very capable. I think we could make a compelling argument for either of them winning. Right. It just felt like Sonic had just a little bit more consistency. Go ahead. A lot of that is just because these rings gave him such a huge advantage in buying time.
I saw someone in the comments in the live chat being like, this is a lot of assumptions about how this fight would go. And it really is, because there's so many different assumptions. Like, there's so many different ways the fight could go that we ultimately had to boil it down to what we thought was the most common, because there's a different victor for so many different ways that it goes.
And for what it's worth, like you said, the argument we presented was what we believed was the most likely scenario. But it's not like we just wrote fan fiction here and said this is what would happen in the fight and who would win. We were talking about a whole bunch of different assumptions for both characters and what would happen in each of those. So while we presented one scenario rife with assumptions, we also talked about a whole host of other assumptions that would have taken things in a very different direction. We talked about how things would go if they were just like a stat brawl, just throwing their calcs together and seeing who comes out on top. And honestly, I don't think you could really get an accurate picture of who would win no matter what, because fiction is just hard to boil down to like that. Right. But I don't think you can get a fair representation of a fight without trying to really boil down into how the specific characters would interact with each other based on their personalities, their strategies, specific abilities, things like that.
Right.
But yeah, it defies easy classification, for sure.
Right. Well, anything else to cover with this? I think we hit about 2 hours worth.
I don't think so. I mean, we could maybe go over some questions if there's anything in particular you wanted to answer that you saw the community ask.
I
saw someone asking who would win between Team Star Fox and Sonic's squad.
I feel like that would go to... Oh no. I feel like that would go to Team Star Fox, since we don't see anyone else carry 10 million rings.
Yeah, that seems likely. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with all of them to say. I would probably bet on Star Fox, but not very strongly.
What about one I saw was Slippy versus Tails?
Definitely Slippy.
I want to do Slippy versus Iron Man so badly. Anyway. I think... Let me do one last scan to make sure I got these questions covered. Let's see. Black hole stuff we covered. Saying he's meteor level we covered. Those labels just drive me crazy because they're so misleading. Not intentionally, but...
Yeah, no, I get you. We've got a couple questions about where did specific abilities come from, and I don't know that I want to dig through my notes to find the answers to that.
Are they Fox or Sonic?
Sonic.
Oh, I can't help you there.
I'm sure that there are others. I'm only looking through the Discord right now for questions. I think if you've got questions about that, we have some forums in the Discord where you can go and post. That'll probably be better for getting you answers to those kind of things. I don't know if this is the best place to do it. Otherwise, it'll turn into a 4-hour-long podcast.
Right. Well, anyway. Sorry. Were you done looking through questions?
Yeah.
Anyway, I know that there are a lot of people on both sides. I saw a surprising number of people on Fox's side wanting or expecting him to win, which I wasn't totally expecting, but there were some people.
I guess one last thing.
Okay.
What do you think about? Like, I know there are a few people who feel like we just kind of caved in because the Sonic fans were angry at us.
They came to my house with glue, and they were threatening to use his best weapon against me. No, we had several conversations as a team that, like, we really don't want to politic here. We really want to get as pure of an answer as we can. And ultimately, like, everyone's going to come in with some kind of bias. Every human is going to come into something with some kind of bias. But we probably had 4 or 5 different conversations about that. Like, we want to set any kind of bias, any kind of fan reaction aside and get what we can.
Mm-hmm. And, like, I get it that it's hard to feel like we weren't just reversing our opinion because people were angry when you see, here's the rematch, and this time Sonic wins, and people were angry about Sonic losing before, so clearly that must be what happened. Mm-hmm. And I especially get that because... I mean, right after the episode, we did just... I mean, it wasn't that we caved to people being angry.
We were like, this feat was debunked. Sonic wins!
Yeah, the main thing we had for why Fox would win was wrong. And so we admitted it, and we said, okay, I guess Sonic wins. And I guess all I could say in our defense is if we were just caving into that pressure, we wouldn't have spent the extra, year and a half going over all of these different feats and... reevaluating both characters and completely making everything from scratch. If all we needed to do was make Sonic fans happy, there were far easier ways we could have done that.
Yeah, I spend so much of my life on this project where I've had to put very specific work-life boundaries in place. But before I did, it was wake up, smash bracket, go to sleep, smash bracket. And that was just months and months, if not a year of my life. And I know it was the same for Lemon too.
Right.
I would not be able to do that if I was just giving into fan stuff.
Although, if we were just giving into fan stuff, we could spend an hour a day on this. And
that would be easier. Just do a fan vote.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's about it. So excited for next time. Red versus Ness. I think it might be the fight I'm most emotionally attached to. And I might be biased, but I think it's the coolest representation of Earthbound and Pokemon in an animation.
I think we need to delay that animation to get more animators on it.
Oh gosh, we had 11. Anyway, think that's it. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this, please just go watch one of our videos. And yeah, until next time.
Let's see you later.